Bird, 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 bird. Get him. Yeah! Ron Babe was right. Ron Babe was right.
I'm feeling spry. Hey everybody, it's Ron Bain with the Hunting Dog Podcast. It is Father's Day. So to all of you fathers out there, happy Father's Day. To all you people with fathers, happy Father's Day. To all you people without fathers, like myself, mine have been gone for many years. Still, happy Father's Day. The best part about Father's Day, it's close to the summer equinox, right? I think it's June 21st. We start losing daylight. And as much as I love summer, once we hit the equinox, it's just a countdown to September. So it's feeling pretty good. It feels as good as the Patreon patrons who join and come on the Zoom rooms and get discounts on products. It almost feels as good as our title sponsor makes you feel while you're out there in the wilds, in the wilderness, or on the lake. That's OnX Hunt, OnX Maps, OnX everything. Everything's OnX. Everything. Our title sponsor, I can't thank them enough. Nor can I thank Pike Gear for all the stuff they do and all the gear they make, like Boss Shot Shells with all the shells they make. All these things, everything ties into a great hunting season, right? You got to have some good stuff. You got to have some good clothes on your back. You got to have quality shotgun shells. Boss shotgun shells are the only copper-plated business shell in the universe. You've heard me say it before. And Waltons, they have everything to make you a wild game chef. I mean, you still got to read some directions and get a cookbook and everything. But if whatever you need to complement your wild game, or like yesterday, we had ribs for Father's Day. It was not wild game. They were bought right from the store because I don't do any big game hunting. But Walton Seasonings, that's what made our Father's Day ribs. Gunner Kennels and Food Crates, they are, well, lifetime warranted. So, I mean, nothing else. No offense to any of my other sponsors, but Gunner is yours for life. You buy it, you'll never have to buy another one. You buy two, that just means you got two dogs. You buy the Food Crate, that means you're smart about where you store your Purina Pro Plan. That stuff comes out of there. Every time I open up that Gunner Food Crate, it smells like I just opened up a bag of dog food. It's airtight. It could float down the river. It could have went on the Lewis and Clark voyage. It could have stored all their gunpowder. That's how good the Food Crate is. It's almost as good as Garmin navigation. I mean, astronauts trust that stuff. If you don't trust what the astronauts trust, well, then you're just not seeing the big picture. Look at Garmin products, and when you look at Garmin products, go to W Hunting Supply because they know. They are one of the supply companies that was involved in the new 300i, everything. They are a company that sells more dog collars than anybody else. Go to the number one hunting dog supply company there is. Go to W, right? Now, they don't carry any Pike gear, sadly. You have to get that. I shouldn't say sadly. You have to get that direct, just like you do Gunner Kennels, just like you have to do Boss Shot Shells, just like you have to get Waltons. You got to go direct to the customer. But you're not dealing with a middleman on this stuff. I think that's the way to go. Now, Purina Pro Plan, yes, we know that's where you keep it in your Gunner Food Crate, and we know that there is a middleman involved with that because you just can't buy it direct from the factory. But here's a cool thing. Purina's got me going down to St. Louis on, I think, the 1st, let me see, July 30, on Tuesday and Wednesday, I'm going to be down at the Purina plant. Going to be probably doing a couple interviews, going to a baseball game. They have a VIP 2-day seminar. We're going to get into the weeds on why this stuff is just so good. It's going to be so much fun. Got a lot to report after that comes back. And Canine Athlete and Wilderness Athlete, they get me through my day. They get my dogs through the summer and the hunting season. I don't know anything on this list that you don't need for hunting season. I mean, literally, think about it. But I can think of two things you should add to it. One of them is the Upland Institute. I know you're like, oh, I still got time to train my dog. No, get on it, Upland Institute. And if you're a Patreon member, you just write me a message, okay? We got a little something for you. Like we step on it a little bit, you know. I let you dip your beak into the Upland Institute. And the same thing if you're an Onyx Elite member, you get to watch a whole bunch of the training sessions for free with a great offer to join up if you're an Onyx Elite member. So that's like a threefold thing. But the other thing that you should do this summer, this week, is you should look at Behind the Dog. You've heard me talk about it. I had the podcast with Dave Utzinger. People are loving it. And I want you to know, when you see it on Instagram, go to Behind the Dog, or you can go to behindthedog.com and just go and purchase it. It's $4.99. And don't think it's just about short hairs, even though the episode we did was with one of the best short hair breeders in the country, okay? This is about how to pick your next pup, how the breeder picks you, how you pick your breeder, the questions to ask, the expectations, the selection process when there's a litter on the ground, what breeders do, what conscientious breeders do to bring a good litter to fruition. You can take the word German Shorthair out of it and apply it to any breed of dog. And it's got some instructional stuff at the end that's just, everybody's raving about it. Everybody goes, Ron, $4.99. The last 10, 15 minutes was worth $49.99. When you see the things you can do with a young pup, and I mean young pup, okay? So don't think it's just about German Shorthairs. This whole film series, Behind the Dog, is intended to bring to light the preeminent, is that the right word? I'm not really good at some of those words that I think I know what they mean. Preeminent dog breeders in this country. We plan on covering every breed of dog in this country that we hunt with, right? Of course, we're going to get into some of the pointing dogs first. We want to get into the hounds. We want to get into the flushers. In fact, there should be a good one coming up in a few months on Labradors. Now, there's a deep subject. But we want to feature the breeders who do the most to keep the breeds that we love to a standard, and not an AKC standard or a UKC or a NAB standard. No, what good breeders do to foster and improve those breeds. You will learn something on every single Behind the Dog film coming up. You cannot get more education for $4.99. Well, I mean, if you bought me a beer at a bar for $4.99, you might learn more, but you'd probably have to buy me about 6 beers before you got all the information out. So for $4.99, you can watch Behind the Dog, and you will learn, especially if you're looking for your first dog. And it could be your second or third dog. I had a good friend of mine write me. He's like, Ron, I thought this was just going to be about, this or that. And he said, I wish I would have watched this before I bought my first dog, let alone my second dog. And if your next dog is going to be a setter or a Llewellyn setter, can you make your mind up? Well, I think this episode with Jeff is going to help you do just that. Have a great week. Talk to you soon. Hey, everybody, it's Ron Bain with the Hunting Dog Podcast. I am on the phone and a Zoom call with Jeff Hancock. If you don't know that name, don't feel bad, because I didn't know that name till Matt Ranella introduced us on a text. So, Jeff, welcome to the show. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having us on. This is going to be great. I think it'll be a lot of fun, so appreciate it.
Yeah, when Matt said he'd talk to you, and you were, as we say in the dog world, a setter guy, that is probably, in 9 years, I probably have had some setter people on, but it's always been, there's a lot of division in the setter world, isn't there? I mean,
oh, man, you're telling me. It seems like there is.
Yeah, from hunt tests to field trials to don't retrieve, do retrieve, don't like water, separate bloodlines. I mean, how did you give us a little background story on that? How you got
Yeah, no problem. So I started hunting about 35 years ago with my grandfather. I grew up in central Kansas, and he had actually purchased me. I think I had told you before the podcast, an English pointer, and part of the reasoning behind him purchasing me an English pointer at such a young age was so he could have access to another English pointer. He
Okay.
was, if he was anything, he was a dog connoisseur, is what I tell people. Seemed like he just kind of came and went with all kinds of dogs all the time. And I don't know what the ultimate number of dogs he got up to was, but somewhere probably in the 15 to 20 dogs range. And enough dogs that he was hiding them from my grandmother. I know that much. He had kennels at our farm, at his house, at other people's farms. I don't know that my grandma ever knew how many pups he had and dogs. So, but yeah. So anyway, I became a setter guy because he actually had a friend that he hunted with all the time, and that friend ran setters. He actually ran English setters, and I always liked hunting with the setters. It just seemed like they were a little bit more of a friendly kind of had a personality type dog, whereas the English pointers I was around anyway were just workaholics. You know, it was all business with them.
Yeah, for
And
sure. They have that, like, just you're right. It's just you could find one that's like a family lap dog, but they're just business. They are kind of all business. Yeah.
yeah, so I inquired with him about maybe a setter, and he said, "Oh man, I wouldn't get a setter until your grandpa's off this earth." That would just really upset him. And so, um, anyway, long story short was my grandpa died when I was about 22 years old, and he left me the rest of his pointers. And then I ended up purchasing an English setter named Tater that was a 3-year-old from a guy and she was already trained. I was just coming out of college, and that kind of got me hooked on setters for the most part, on just English setters anyway. At that point,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, when it went to the, I see now my mind's wandering because, like, so you kind of inherited your grandpa's dogs, which there was unquestionable amount of, anywhere from 3 to 5.
Yeah.
So you get out of college, you got to kind of take care of these pointers, but you go to a setter. What happened? Did the pointers just conveniently die, age out and die away, or did you have to go find homes for them, or did you become a kennel owner at the same time?
No, my grandpa, I think, saw the handwriting on the wall that he wasn't going to be hunting much longer, and so his pointers that he had were anywhere from 10 to 12 years old when I inherited them.
Yeah.
So they weren't really around much longer after I inherited him. He had some really good pointers. I mean, these were dogs that he had professionally trained, and they were just phenomenal dogs. And so I didn't end up with a whole bunch. Some of them had already died by the time that time had rolled around. So I inherited 3, and I had the one that he had purchased me that at that time was 10 years old.
Right.
And so, yeah, I just, I only had that many dogs for just a few years. And then I actually ended up going back to school and doing my master's degree, got pretty busy with life and stuff, and just had one dog for a while. And then when I finished my master's degree, I went on the hunt for a different dog. And that's when I landed on English setters.
Yeah, and that's an interesting story from your kennel name that you currently have to where you found your first Llewellyn Setter, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had that 3-year-old for a long time. I actually reared a litter of pups out of her. I did it kind of the way all of us kind of started, I think. I just found another dog I liked the way it hunted and put them together. And the next thing you know, I had a litter of pups. And I got one right here trying to nose up on me.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had a litter of pups, and I kept one of those pups until she died. And she was probably 15 when she died. And but at some point there, before I was completely out of English setters, I started looking around for just a new setter. And I knew the setters I had weren't the greatest in the world, in just terms of their abilities and qualities and things like that. And so I did kind of a deep dive. And then I learned a little bit about Llewellyn setters. and ultimately landed with a lady named Laura Harmon, and she lived in Iowa, and she was in the business of breeding Llewellyn setters, and that's where I found the first Llewellyn I got, which her name's Stella. We still have her around here, actually.
She's got to be up there a few years now, right?
Yeah, she's pushing on 9 years old right now. But I can tell you, I mean, everybody's had this kind of experience where we took her out hunting here in Kansas. I think it was the second year, because I think I got her late in the year. She might have been maybe 16 months old when I actually got her out. And, we were hunting a patch of CRP, and she was on something, but we didn't know what she was on, but she was trailing it. And finally, you get to the end of the field. If you pheasant hunt, oftentimes those pheasants will stop where they can't run anymore.
Right.
And that pheasant finally stopped, but she worked that pheasant for a good quarter mile and then pointed it, and it got up and I shot it. And from that point forward, I was hooked. And then she has been an excellent dog on pheasants, probably the best dog I've ever had on pheasants, just because she can relocate so well. But
that's a talent not every dog has,
Yeah.
Pheasants, everyone asks me, what's my favorite bird to hunt, and I cut my teeth on pheasants in Illinois, and my first big road trips were South Dakota. But then when I realized later from all the stories we told each other, like, it's the sneakiest, nastiest, smartest bird that, like, I go grouse hunting in the woods. I don't have a grouse sitting by my feet while I light up a cigar, right? And I have done that. I've had a conversation with somebody for minutes, and there's a rooster hiding by my feet, right? You don't get a grouse to do that, or a sharp tail, or a Hungarian. Pheasant's the only one that does that shit to a person and a dog.
Yeah, I can tell you from experience, like my grandfather, he had almost refused to hunt pheasants with his pointers. He felt like it ruined his dogs, just because once they really didn't know, and it could have just been those particular dogs, but they just were terrible at relocating. Their relocating was once that thing started moving, they just went after it. It would fly, of course, and nobody got to shoot anything. But yeah, I mean, I've had, and the other setters I've had, Llewellins and English setters, they've all done a fairly good job of doing that relocation on the point, but so it's been a good experience. But I tell you what, like Laura, she had just a great program with her dogs, and that's why we landed with her and ultimately ended up buying the kennel from her.
So what, she was retiring, or she just, and then you obviously built enough relationship with her from Iowa to Kansas. She didn't call you up as a past customer and say, "Hey, do you want to buy my kennel?" Right?
No, it's kind of a funny story. So I think she ended up producing 28 litters. I think that's right, 28 litters in the time she had the kennel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got the first one from her, and then we decided to get another one maybe 4 or 5 years later, and then we ended up getting another one, and then another one. The next thing you know, we had 4 of them running around here. But ultimately, the first dog that we got, Stella, she's getting up towards 9 years old, and I had visited with Laura about getting on a reservation list to maybe pick up another one in a few years. And she said, well, I'm not taking reservations. In fact, I think I'm going to close the kennel down because I want to move to Florida where it's warm. And so she had one little female that she said, I've got one little female here, and you can buy her. And so we ended up buying her. And then when I went up there to go pick up that female, I just inquired with her, like, what are you going to do with the rest of these dogs and all this kennel stuff, And she said, well, I don't know. And I asked her if she would be willing to sell it. And she said, yeah, I would consider that. And I think what was important to Laura was making sure that, her program was just like top notch. And I think she just wanted to make sure that continued. Our thought was not to change a thing, because she was doing the health testing. She was finding good homes. She was screening people, and we've kind of continued doing all that stuff. I think that's what she was worried about, because she did kind of leave a legacy with these dogs. There's a lot of existing customers that are still calling us.
That story can't have been repeated too many times in this country. Basically, even though you're a repeat customer, you built a relationship with this woman, and she's like, it would have been easier for her to just close down. But
yeah,
she knew you enough and your wife enough, and what you said really stuck out was like, and we weren't going to change a thing. We were going to say, you know what Laura's dogs always needed, right? You just no, we've gotten these fantastic Llewellyn Setters from her. And do you still consult with her? Do you still
I do. Yeah, I consult with her a ton about different things, whether it's breeding pairs or a past customer, or maybe somebody will send in an application or something, and I ask her how she would, go through that application, because it might be just a peculiar circumstance. But yeah, I talk to her all the time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And she's just in the Florida sunshine, and you're her legacy, basically.
Yeah, she's in the Florida sunshine, and we've got all the dogs, and she seems pretty happy about it. I know we're happy about it for sure. Yeah.
Now, how involved is your wife with everything? Because usually when you have, I'm assuming, a litter or two or more a year, that's a chore. I mean, that's a huge chore. Is this a whole family there with you and the family?
Yeah, so I couldn't do it without my wife, for dang sure. I mean, we both have full-time jobs. We're both engineers, and she probably does most of the hard work. I take care of a lot of the phone calls and responding back to folks that are interested or just have questions, that kind of stuff. Or if they have questions specific to how the dogs hunt or what they're like in the home, I handle a lot of that. But my wife handles like all of our web page for the most part. She handles all the litters. I mean, there's oftentimes when litters happen whatever time of day, and you'll find me in my bed and you'll find her out in the puppy cottage, whelping pups. So
it's usually not time of day, it's usually time of night.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. But yeah, so she is awesome. I mean, there is no doubt about it that she is really awesome with these dogs, and really does a good job caring for not only the pups but the growing dogs too. She takes off the summers with our kids, because our kids are home from school, obviously, and she takes all of our we have all females, and we just use stud dogs through contracts, but she takes all of our females out every morning before it gets too hot and lets them run 4 or 5 miles. And so, I mean,
keeps them in condition,
keeps them in good shape, and and it keeps them. We're not really able to. Where we hunt them is we live pretty close to some public land next to some on a Corps of Engineers reservoir, and we usually take a break during the nesting season, especially turkeys. We've got a ton of turkeys kind of around where we're at, and but yeah, she'll go over there and she'll run them 4 or 5 miles, and even though they're not really into the thick of birds or anything like that, just having them out running and seeing how they can learn how to pattern, walk with you, instead of just kind of running, it's good for them. So by the time hunting season rolls around, I mean, these dogs, taking them out in the field is just another day, so it's really super helpful.
It's just got a little icing on the cake when there's birds involved. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
What did you learn from like your early setters that made you, with research or by meeting, the breeder who owned it before you, what made you go with the Llewellyn Setter? Because I'm a guy who I've heard the term Llewellyn Setter, but in a lot of registries, like in NAVDA for versatile hunt testing, it's ES, English Setter. We don't, but we know there's divisions, there's Gordon Setters, there's Llewellyn Setters, but they're still English Setters technically.
Right. Yeah.
What would you say is in your findings, the biggest difference that you've found?
Well, the biggest difference is, to hunt with a Llewellyn setter, you got to wear a plaid jacket. You can't just wear any orange hunting vest, right?
That's because of the Llewellyn history.
Yeah, there you go. No, actually, there's not a ton of difference. I think the big one, and we can talk a little bit about the history whenever you're ready to, but
Yeah.
the biggest thing that I have noticed is I feel like the Llewellyns tend to do a little better job adapting to the type of terrain they're hunting in than maybe the English setters do. And by that, what I mean is we spend a lot of time in Kansas, but I also hunt Montana, Wyoming, the Dakotas. I make my way up into the Northwoods to hunt almost every year or every other year at least.
Yeah.
And you may not let them out of the box and they instantly figure it out, but within a half a day or a couple hours, they learn pretty quick to adapt what range they're at and the style that they're hunting based on that type of terrain. That's something I've noticed. I don't know if it's really got anything to do with them being Llewellyns or just the particular Llewellyns that I have. The other thing I notice about Llewellyns, and you and I have talked about this before, is I tend to believe that they retrieve more naturally than maybe an English setter does. And I don't necessarily know if that's because they're a Llewellyn or because most of the Llewellyns, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, are hunting dogs and not trial dogs. And so
yeah, I see.
they just get
Yeah.
they just get hunted more, and they're retrieved to hand is kind of a natural thing that's ingrained in them. But the English setters I've been around and the ones I've owned, they either had to be force broke to retrieve, which I don't like doing, so I'm not very good at it.
Right.
And so they've either got to have that happen with them, or you just got to accept the fact that they're not going to retrieve birds for you.
Right.
And so those are kind of the two big ones that I notice anyway. But there could be others too, other differences.
Well, when you say that, if the Llewellyns were, let's say, without going to the back history, more of a foot hunting dog as opposed to the trial dogs. I mean, I don't think anybody's going to argue that the trial dogs have more go and less retrieve, right? I mean, that's kind of a thing.
You're right. Yeah.
And a dog with a good cooperation. When you talked about taking the dog to different areas, there definitely are dogs that, if they're, let's just say for a number, let's say it's a 300-yard dog, right? And somebody lives in North Dakota. Some of those dogs, they do get to the woods or they do get to smaller fields and they stay a 300-yard dog, which doesn't always serve you really well.
Right. Right.
And what I've learned in judging dogs, that one of the there's 7 traits that all dogs inherit if they're pointing being one of the traits. Cooperation is an inherited trait. So maybe they're just innately a more cooperative dog, meaning the silent teamwork that they just do with you, like the retrieve natural. That's cooperation also, and maybe that level of cooperation says, I've got to have X amount of contacts, at least visual, with my owner. Maybe that's why they adjust. I guess nobody will really know, but I have to always lean these things to, like, it's got to be something inherited in the dog, right? So
yeah,
I would guess it's a cooperation thing where they feel the need to be like, oh, we're somewhere different. I'll act a little different, Could be.
Yeah, I think it could be for sure. And I think too, our dogs, I mean, we have 7 dogs. It just seems crazy. I think my grandpa will be rolling over in his grave right now if he knew I had 7 dogs roaming around openly in my house.
Oh, all of them in the house?
Oh man, we let them go wherever they want to go. So they just go.
Man.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, but what I was getting at was these dogs are with us a lot. We take them on vacations. Not all of them all the time, but we'll take a dog or two with us on a vacation. We spend a lot of time with them. And I think there is like some level of trust that's built over time with the dog. So like you say, when you get to the grouse woods and that dog gets 200 or 300 yards away from you and can't see you anymore,
right,
it makes them a little nervous. Like, oh man, where's that guy at? I trust that guy. I want to hang out with him. I better go back wherever he's at. Follow the noise.
Right.
And so I think that there's some of that goes on too.
Let's touch on a little of history. I could probably
Yeah.
put up two words that I remember, but where that division, I would say, lack of a better word, where did that division start, or where did the name? How did that name Llewellyn become Llewellyn Setter?
Yeah. Well, I will caveat the history with there's a lot of different versions, and it depends on what you read. But I've studied it quite a bit, and from what I can tell, well, let's just go all the way back to English setters and where the English setters came from. So English setters are probably one of the oldest hunting
Yeah.
dog breeds
Yeah.
on planet Earth. I mean, you can date back and find information about English setters that goes back to the 15th century.
Mhm.
And the my understanding is the name, the English setter, came from the crossing between probably some Springer Spaniels, Water Spaniels, and maybe one other Spaniel breed that I can't recall off the top of my head that doesn't even exist anymore.
Right.
And but the name setting came from these dogs were trained. You have to remember, you think back to the 15th century, probably most people weren't hunting for sport as much as they were for food.
Right.
And so, folks would take these dogs out, they would point, they were trained to set, in other words, lay down on their belly, and then gentlemen with, or ladies, I guess it might be, would take nets and drag nets over the tops of the dogs to basically trap the birds as opposed to shooting them.
Almost like a duck
So-
banding operation.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of where the name setting came from. And then if you look back in history in the early 1800s, there was a gentleman by the name of Edward Laverick in England, and he brought what became known as setting spaniels to England and started trying to breeding them to do different things in terms of hunting. And so he developed his own line, and he registered his first English setter in the mid 1800s. And then he actually is what most people refer to as the godfather of the English setter, because he was the first one that really brought that breed to any kind of prominence. And he
Mhm.
actually wrote a book called The Setter, which even today is kind of the standard for how setters should look, act, those kinds of things.
Wow.
And anyway, to move on, in the later 1800s, those dogs became extremely popular, but they were more popular in the show ring than they were in the field. And then there was a gentleman by the name of Richard Llewellyn, who was born in the mid 1800s, and he was a smart dude. He had a bachelor's and master's degree. His given name was actually Richard Purcell, but the story is that through some kind of a agreement to receive an inheritance, he had to change his name to Llewellyn in order to receive the inheritance from his mom's side of the family.
Huh.
And so that's kind of where the Llewellyn name came from. But anyway, he liked hunting, but he wanted to take this English setter that was typically a show dog and turn it into a bird dog, or at least so it had more field qualities. And his point was, we're judging these dogs in the show ring based on field qualities we feel like they should have, but we're not really seeing them actually work and do their thing in the field.
Which a lot of people complained about dogs over the years, right? I mean, that happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, so he started messing around, and he actually ended up taking some of Laverick's dogs and breeding them with some other English setters. Most people would refer to it as the dashing Bantu line that Llewellyn created. And again, it's just a Llewellyn or an English setter. These aren't really any different than they're a breed.
Right.
So that's what he had done. And then if you take it a little bit farther, like he really never intended for the dogs to be called Llewellyns. But there was a gentleman by the name of A.H. Smith, and he was born in the early 1800s, and then he ended up immigrating to Canada in the mid 1800s. And he was a pretty avid dog breeder, He helped create some of the field trials throughout North America at that time. I mean, if you think back, America was not very old at this point
No.
in history, 1776. So Smith ended up purchasing 4 dogs from Laverick and Llewellyn. He ended up breeding, and he purchased them while he was in England. He ended up breeding the 2 dogs, and then him and the 4 dogs all together, including the one that was bred, headed on over to Canada. And he had a dog that came out of that litter by the name of Paris. And this is kind of a really interesting story. This dog was a phenomenal dog in the field and in the show ring, so it was kind of the best of both worlds. And but he won his first dog show around 1875, and this is just crazy to me. But after he had won that dog show, that dog was worth $5,000 back in the 1800s, which would be about $120,000 today, which is just crazy to me.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, that dog ended up being a really famous dog. Even after its death, it ended up on sun-kissed orange labels of all things in the world. The sun-kissed orange company in California purchased the image because they thought it was a classical image of something American at that point.
Yeah.
But anyway, he ended up retiring from dog breeding in about 1900, and the story goes that he said something along the lines, when asked why he retired, he said something along the lines, "Well, I had no more American dogs to beat, so I got bored." But yeah, so for those that know, the field dog stud book was created in 1874, I think it is.
Right.
And that's when it first started. That's the registry that recognizes Llewellyn setters at this point. But they actually didn't publish an actual registry that was publishable until 1901. And when it was published in 1901, is that right? 1901? I take that back. The first published registry was in 1901, and then in 1902 they added Llewellyn setters as a breed. What's funny about that story is in the 1901 edition, the author defined what a breed was and what a strain was. And then in the 1902 registry that got published, he actually called the Llewellyn setter a breed. It was actually a mistake. He meant to call it a strain.
Oh.
And then in 1903, he published a correction, but by that time it was too late. Llewellyns were here. People were selling Llewellyns, and so the name kind of stuck, and it stuck as a breed at that point, even though they're just English setters.
Right. So
yeah, and
field dog stud book. I remember I got, when I first moved to Michigan, I went to a field trial, learned about American Field, the magazine that came out every Saturday, gave you all the reports on things. And I thought that was going to be my path. It didn't turn out to be. But I used to read the history of that magazine. That magazine was published, like their UKC owns it now, but that was like the newspaper every week about field trials and about dog breedings and I mean, to think that there was a weekly published newspaper that was obviously probably on newsstands in Chicago, which is where it was from, but probably mailed to, every state in the union. But they like almost accidentally created 2 registries, right? Because there'd be English setter registry and Llewellyn registry, but almost by oops.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the differentiator now is in order to register a Llewellyn setter as a Llewellyn, like we're required to send the sires and the dams DNA swabs to Field Dog Stud Book, who then sends them on to UC Davis in California. And then they test that DNA to see if it tracks all the way back to that dashing Bantu line that Llewellyn created. And we can't register a litter as a Llewellyn litter unless we do that. So every time we start a new litter, with a new sire and a new dam, then we've got to go back through that process to make sure that happens.
So you mentioned that you keep only females, and I know quite a few breeders around the country that it's just easier without having males there, as long as you have the source for the males. For one, there's probably a lot less peeing on each other and occasional heat related dog fights and everything like that. But what's your process for finding the right stud if you're not, if it's not under your own roof?
Yeah. So, fortunately, Laura had created a network of stud dogs that we have access to. The problem is a lot of them are a long ways away from us.
Hmm.
And so we've done live covers, live breedings where we either haul one of our females to the stud or the stud comes to us and just stays for a week or two,
Yep.
which it kind of is a pain in the ass, to be honest with you. And the other thing we've done is we've done some artificial insemination with mixed results. We've got the town where we're at is where the Kansas State University is, and they've got a real nice vet college here that can help us with that.
Yeah.
And then the other kind of source we use is if you do enough research, you find out Llewellyn Setters are not like GSPs. I mean, it's almost like you can find a GSP breeder on every corner.
Oh
But
yeah. Yeah.
this
I agree.
the network of Llewellyn breeders is pretty dang small, and especially when you look at it geographically. And then when you narrow that list down to the ones that at least I feel are reputable and kind of have the same mission as we do,
Right.
then you really develop a real good friendship, both professionally and personally, with these people, and we're able to, share studs and females that way. So it works pretty good. One in particular, and I would feel bad if I didn't mention him, is Houdini Llewellyn Setters in Iowa.
Mhm.
Randy Herman owns Houdini Llewellyn Setters. He actually purchased Houdini Llewellyn Setters from somebody, just like we purchased Hickory Hollow Llewellyn Setters from someone.
Wow.
And Randy has been a phenomenal resource for us, just both in information, helping us match up females, and we're very specific about who we breed our dogs with because of the health traits that we're trying to not diminish, but trying to avoid.
Stay ahead of. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, stay ahead of. So like he's really good at helping us get matched up with really good dogs.
What do you, I mean, not to get into the details, but health testing, back in the day was everybody did OFA and then some pen hip and then some eye stuff. What's it like now? Is it like a lot of breeders you're sending us you're sending the blood work in to look for every possible thing out there that could be wrong? And what's that like?
Yeah, so without getting into a whole lot of the details, like you said, we do the hip check with OFA. We check eyes with OFA, so they're certified. On the hips, that grading is either, I think it's poor, fair, good, or excellent. And so anything above a fair and above is in terms of OFA is a breedable dog. We try to at least have good or excellent hips in our dogs.
Sure.
And there's a process. I mean, the hips have to be X-rayed. The X-rays are sent into OFA, and then they're independent. Doctors look at them and make a determination.
Right.
And then the eyes are either pass, fail. Some of the setters have had some issues with their eyes and blindness, and so we're just trying to make sure that we avoid any of that. But
is that a trait or a marker you can have a gene test done for?
It is. Yeah, you can have a gene test done for it, and we use Embark to do all of our gene to test the DNA and the genes, and just look back to see if there's any kind of history in that blood of health issues. So those are the three primary ones that we're concerned about. Some folks test elbows, and we do sometimes, but not all the time.
Yeah.
We stick with just hip size, and then we do the Embark analysis. And that Embark analysis is pretty awesome because it not only looks at health traits, but it looks at coat color. So we can look at the markers for coat color, and when we're breeding two together, we have a pretty good idea of what kind of colors we're going to get.
Yeah.
Not that that's important to us, but probably a third of our dogs end up in homes where people don't hunt them at all, and it is important to them.
Right,
So
right. I want an
yeah,
orange and white, or I want a,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
But so we can kind of at least give people an idea of what to expect in terms of the litter before they decide to put a deposit down on it.
yeah,
But yeah, that embark analysis is amazing because it looks for over 200 different 200 different genes, look at different traits
yeah.
or health issues, not genes, but 200 different health traits that maybe one should consider in a dog.
And the more people use it, the more data gets into the database.
Yep.
And yeah,
Yeah.
and you said something about German short hairs, and I love the dogs. I had my first dog was a German short hair, or I would say my first good dog. And you're right. I don't think I'd have to travel out of my county to find at least a huntable one, right? That might
Right.
be great, but I certainly wouldn't have to drive out of the state of Michigan, right?
Yeah.
The upside is with setters, I wouldn't have to drive out of the state of Michigan for a good setter either, because
Probably.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of good grouse dogs. But for people who don't know the setters, there's I don't know all the lines. There's Hemlocks and Rymans, and then just English. Size wise, where is Llewellyn? They have breed standard, right? A breed standard is written up for every breed. Is there a measurable difference in the Llewellyn that shouldn't be crossed, as opposed to, I've seen some English setters that are, I'm exaggerating, they look like they're 30 inches at the shoulder, right?
Right.
So where's their size supposed to be at?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that there's anything specific related to the size of Llewellins and those kinds of. There probably has to be, but I don't pay attention to it.
Right.
And I'll tell you, like, we have most of our females are generally somewhere between 38 and 45 pounds. But we got one female that's just right at 50 pounds. And the males typically run, anywhere from 45 to maybe 55 pounds in the Llewellins that I've seen. And I've seen straight English setters that are smaller, and I've seen straight English setters that are bigger. And so there is a breed standard specific to Llewellyn setters. I don't know what it is.
Oh, well, I guess, and I don't either, but I would probably say it's probably not the extreme plus or minus of either. It's probably not going to be tiny, and it's probably not going to be too tall. I'd say medium size, because I've seen enough setters, but I couldn't until the person says it's a Llewellyn, right? And you've said that it is an English setter, but it's a distinct line. Or you could almost say a distinct breeding line, strain, like you said.
Yep. Yeah. Right.
But did the Llewellyns have and I'm going back to this cooperation and the natural retrieve. I'm assuming that the English setters that people refer to in the field trial game are probably not Llewellyns, or is that not the case? Do Llewellyns do some field trial stuff?
No, there's some Llewellyns that do field trial stuff, but I think generally speaking, most of the setters you're seeing are probably going to be English setters.
Right.
Yeah. If I had to guess.
If you went to Field Dog Stud Book, they're going to, at some point, it's going to lean heavier to just the English setter.
Yeah, correct. Yep, for sure. Yeah. And I'll be the first one to admit, I don't spend a lot of time understanding all that because, frankly, it's not important to what we're doing, which is we're just trying to breed good foot hunting dogs that are Llewellyn setters. And so size and stuff, we do try to keep, I wouldn't say we made it a goal, but if we can, we'd like the dogs to be smaller rather than larger.
Right.
And the only reason for that is because it seems like heat can be an issue with a larger dog.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
For anybody that wants to, hunt early season, Montana, or even here in Kansas in the early part of the season, it can be pretty warm, and the smaller dogs tend to do a little bit better with the heat. Just a lot less dog to cool down.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like part of the Bergman's principle, right? I mean, the bigger, the heavier, the hairier, they're not going to be they're going to be better in cold, but they're not going to be good in the heat.
Right. Yep. Yep.
And you mentioned something about natural retrieve. Now, in my opinion, like I've never owned a dog, and I've had a lot of different breeds. I've been very fortunate; they were all, at least in their breed, they were natural retrievers. Now, I always take them through hold and carry on the table because I want them to hold the bird, right? I've only taken 2 dogs through the complete force fetch and it's not because they didn't retrieve, it's because they were so good. I wanted to send them on blind retrieves and be able to have them pick up my wallet off the ground, right? Is Llewellyn, is that something that you could almost say is a blanket statement that, because there's a kind of a joke in our world or the rest of the hunting dog world about 1/3 of setters will retrieve and about 1/3 of setters like the water, right? Because there's a lot of that field trial stuff that was for 100 and some years. They didn't work on those things. What's Llewellyn when it comes to, like, typically retrieving's good? How's the water with them? Do they go in water well?
Yeah, I mean, we have had zero issue with our dogs going in the water. And again, I think a lot of that has to do with just maybe our setup and how we introduce them to the water. First of all, we live very close to a lake, like within walking distance, where we can just run down to the water whenever we want to, which is super helpful.
Yeah.
But when the dogs are fairly young, we'll take the whole herd down, and when a young dog sees 5 other dogs jumping in the water and having a good old time,
Yeah.
they're a little less resistant to going in the water themselves.
Right.
And I think that helps. We've got maybe, I think one of ours, all of ours will swim, but I think we've got one that will maybe only go up. She always wants to be touching bottom.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, so from what I can tell, I mean, I'm not going to say it applies to every Llewellyn setter in the world, but I would say 9 out of 10 will go in the water.
Right.
Yeah. Now, they're not meant to be in the water. Like these dogs, if you get them in the water on a cold day, they don't shed water like the seal skin of a lab.
No, they're going to be cold.
They're going to be cold and wet the rest of the day. So I wouldn't plan on taking a Llewellyn setter and trying to make a duck dog out of it or something.
No.
Yeah.
But somebody would. Somebody
Oh
would.
yeah, I think of it an occasional timeout, no problem at all. But
Right.
they do get cold and they'll stay cold.
When it comes to the hunting them, now you've been messing around since you were a little kid. It's kind of a jump question. You had the pointers early, you got the setter early, you got the Llewellyns later. Do you think it makes for a good first time dog? Because there's some power dogs out there that don't make for a first time dog owner. I mean, it's sometimes it's too much dog.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that, and like I did with the Broncos, like I would love every dog to go to a hunting home that hunts 30 days or 40 days a year, but we know that's not reality. So they obviously make a good house dog too. They have to. But
yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, when people ask me if we raise hunting dogs, I tell them no, we raise family dogs, because for the most part, I mean,
even if you hunt a lot.
Yeah, the general upland hunter is gonna hunt maybe 10 days a year.
Oh yeah, that's a fact. You get a couple weekends and a week off. I mean,
yeah,
it's a sad truth, but it's the truth.
Yeah, so I mean, whatever dog that you end up with, I think you got to think about it. Like, what's this dog going to be doing the other 355 days a year?
Right.
And so, yeah, I tell everybody we raise family dogs that you can take hunting. And if they're raised like that, I really feel like they are a great starter dog. The Llewellyns are anyway. And I'll caveat that
it's not a dog that's going to intimidate the first time dog owner so bad that he's like,
no, No,
Yeah.
and they are having been around English setters a lot. You know, an English setter's a hard-headed dog, and they will turn you into a mean son of a bitch sometimes. And so, but these Llewellyns, they're soft dogs in my experience. They react well. They want to please, and you don't really have to get on them too much to get them to do what you want them to do. And
Right.
so, from that perspective, I mean, like my kids are ages 13 and 15, and they've been had dogs around their entire lives. And of course, now my kids are at the age where they can go hunting, and they have these dogs will, do whatever they need them to do out in the field, even the puppies that are brand new, because they're just so loyal and they just want to be around you. But that said, I've got a cousin who's got GSPs, and his daughter just ran one through a NABDA test, and she's maybe 10 years old. His daughter is. She had
Right.
no problems.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
why I've always strived to tell people, whatever breed you're looking for, get to know the breeder, and if possible, get to really meet their dogs. You could find that in any breed, but it's nice when you can sit back and say, look, the hunter's not going to be unhappy if he buys a dog from me. And the guy who thinks he was going to hunt, but his wife doesn't let him go, is also not going to be unhappy with me.
Yeah, for sure.
You know?
Yeah, no, these, like I said, they're great little family dogs and pretty soft, easy to get along with.
What do you do any? I mean, because the coat can be like it's a silky, soft coat. Obviously, it can get a lot of stick tights and cockleburs. Do you do any coat preparation for hunting season? And sandburs are a whole nother story. I know you got to have some sandburs around you somewhere.
Oh
But
yeah, if you don't like picking stickers, don't get a setter. That's the bottom line.
okay,
Yeah, no, these we we tend to shave the dogs usually about this time of year. Not all of them, but a few of them will shave their coats.
yeah,
And then by the time hunting season rolls around, it's not so shaggy and bad, but they still got enough fur on them to keep them warm.
right.
But yeah, so it's intense, and we have a lot of that around here: sandburs, stickums, everything. I'm looking at a dog right now. I can just see right now she's got stickers stuck in her ears because she went around in this morning and nobody's brushed her ears out yet.
Right.
But I can tell you, like I mentioned my wife earlier, she has perfected the dog grooming, and she did a giant search and bought more combs than you can shake a stick at to try to figure out what would work best to try to get the burrs and stuff out of these dogs. And what we landed on was a mustache comb. And so
Like
it's,
a people mustache comb.
yeah, and she found some that are made out of stainless steel, and they're about 3 inches long, and they've got a fine comb on one side and a coarse comb on the other side, and they are just perfect for pulling stickers out.
So
And we
what
just comb that through them.
you need to find some manufacturer who make that about 5 inches long, and that would cut your time down by a third
Yeah, it might.
for grooming.
But yeah, the stickers are a real issue. I spend quite a bit of time. I shouldn't say quite a bit. I try to make my way up to the sandhills in Nebraska a couple of times a year.
Yeah,
Sandburs are real bad up there,
yeah,
especially if you get around like the stock tanks where there's some water and stuff. And so
right,
if they get super bad, I just run boots on the dogs.
right. What kind of boots do you like?
Trying to think. Now you got me at a loss
Yeah.
for what are those the rubber ones that everybody has? Yeah, Lewis's.
Yeah. That seems to be, and I think people learn that. I learned that lesson. I came out of Wyoming on a bird hunt once, and Ed Arnett, he lived in Colorado and he hunts Kansas a lot or Nebraska a lot, and he wanted us to go to the Nebraska, the sandhills, and we got out there, and within seconds, our dogs were, they can't move,
Yeah.
they can't move. And I always had a bunch of nylon boots in my dog box, never used them, but had them. And they were like from Cabela's, and they shredded in hours. They literally shredded,
Yeah.
And I've just never had to deal with that. But with this, does the well, what should I say? I have never owned a pair of Lewis boots, and I need to get some to keep in my dog box. Is do you just go places around even home, or just when you know where you're going, where there's sandburs, where you just put them on?
We run them on our dogs sometimes around home. Usually when there's snow or ice on the ground, especially at a certain temperature.
Okay.
If it's really, really cold out, it's not a big problem. But if it gets warm enough, I'm gonna say like low 30s, like right around the freezing temperature, then they'll form ice balls in the hair between the toes on their feet,
Right.
and it's almost like having a sandburr stuck up in there. And so when that happens, we'll typically put the boots on them. And how
Yeah.
you can tell, it's real easy because if you're hunting in snow, the dog will run by you and you'll see a blood spot
Yeah.
in the
Right.
snow, and then you're like, oh man, I better put dog boots on. but in general around here, and like generally in the Northwoods, I would say running dogs is like running them on carpet in your house.
Oh yeah.
But when you go like Arizona, I go down there, and even New Mexico, man, that's really hard. At least on my dogs, because their feet aren't accustomed to it. It's pretty hard on their feet. Chews them up pretty good. So
You've got basically a bucket full of boots.
I've got a bucket full of boots. I bet I have like 10 pairs of them.
Right.
Yeah.
And
it's kind.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's kind of a pain in the ass to have to put on dog boots and deal with dog boots, but if you really are going to do something for multiple days, it's almost a necessity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like you said, if when I hunted Michigan, until I went out, even my first year in South Dakota, I just got lucky and I didn't get into sandburs, but I didn't know what they were. And the first time I saw my dog, like, what I'm looking at, he's standing out in the field and he can't move, right?
Yeah.
And then he's biting at his paw, and then I go out there and I got no gloves on, and I can't even get them things out of his feet.
Yeah.
That is the absolute. I don't care about the coat maintenance, about the cockleburs and stick tights, but sandburs are like God's version of you shouldn't be out here with your dog.
Yep.
I do want to. I want to jump onto something else you had wrote in some notes you gave me. The process you go through with selling dogs to make it a good fit. So in general, they'll make a good house hunting dog or hunting house, however you want to do it.
Yeah.
Beyond that, what's your process for, like, I don't mean to get into the details like you interview somebody, but all breeders, they want to get to know the buyer if they don't know them. What's some of the things you look for in that?
Yeah. So we start by having them fill out an application. It's on our website.
Mm-hmm.
And that application just kind of tells us what kind of questions we need to answer. And primarily what we're concerned with is we want to make sure somebody's not, in an apartment, or if they are in an apartment, they have a way to get these dogs out every day and get them a little bit of space to run. I mean, after all, they make good house dogs, but if you have one just cooped up in the house all day, they'll chew on their feet, they'll chew on stuff in your house, and they've got to have some kind of outlet.
Yeah.
And so typically what we're after is trying to make sure that their living condition is such that they have either a fenced in, at a minimum, like a fenced in backyard where they can go and chase squirrels up trees and whatever else.
Yeah.
But, and beyond that, we're just making sure we're not giving one of the dogs to a criminal or something else.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the primary concern that we have. But, sometimes if they have real little kids, we'll ask some questions about maybe their past experiences with dogs.
Yeah, that would help. That would help.
I mean, with any dog, I don't care how good you say it is, you just don't want kids sticking their faces up in front of a dog.
No.
So yeah, those kinds of things are really what we're after. And then commitment, just somebody that's committed to taking care of the dog.
Right.
We also, some of these things we can't control ultimately, but at least we want to check the box that we asked about it. You know,
Right.
we're not feeding them crummy food, that kind of stuff.
Right. Which is
Yeah.
pretty typical stuff,
Yeah.
Um,
There's nothing magical about it.
no, but it's always funny when you're a conscientious breeder. You think you almost feel like you're, and I hate to use that word because you're not a flat brim guy, like you said, you know, but you almost feel like you have to be a little woke. You got to almost pry a little bit because you do want to make sure that it's a good place for that dog,
Yeah.
where when your grandpa bought dogs, the wives had nothing to do with the decision. The dog was going to be in a kennel, and it was just a matter of two guys shaking a hand. They didn't give a shit if the guy was Otis Campbell, the town drunk, or if he hunted. You know what I mean? They just it was different back in that day. It was kind of like anybody
Oh
bought
yeah.
a bird dog. You didn't say like, "You're not going to whip him, are you?" But part of us nowadays, you want to like, I sure hope he doesn't have any violent tendencies. But
I can tell you,
go ahead.
I can tell you, my wife, even when we've screened and done everything, a lot of these people, we don't meet them until the day they come pick up their pup, but we
Right.
talk to them on the phone.
Right.
And whenever a litter goes away, there's always one or two that my wife is like, man, I hope that was the right choice.
Yeah. And that's probably never the one that becomes a problem,
Yeah, probably.
I had I think it was my first litter of Broncos, and that's a pretty esoteric dog. When I got mine, there wasn't that many around. And because I traveled so much for a living, I wasn't opposed. I've flown a few dogs to people, and that's a whole nother subject for another podcast. But from my house to Virginia, I think I had 5 dogs sold between Michigan and Virginia, from Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, and I literally made a trip and I dropped pups off to people. And one of them happened to be in Pennsylvania. And 2 months, no, not 2 months, about 6 months later, called me up, said, boy, we're having some problems with this dog. And I said, well, what's the problems? Well, it's peeing in the crate. It's peeing outside. It doesn't like the crate. It doesn't. And boy, I got this weird feeling about this, and on top of that, he was a lawyer. So see, as a breeder, you're always going like, oh, don't sell him to a lawyer. Anyway, he wrote me a very strong letter about, he took the dog, or he had a behaviorist. There's another red flag, right? He had a behaviorist come over to the house to evaluate the dog. And then he asked me, he said, would you mind talking to the behaviorist? I said, absolutely not. And so when I talked to the behaviorist answer was, I can't quite put my thumb on it, but this dog's just not right.
What the world?
Like, what? You're charging this guy probably $150 an hour to come over to this house, and I can't really pinpoint it. And I'm like, you know what? I said, I'll take the dog back. I'll give you your money back. And I got the dog. I brought it. I had a home in Virginia for work and had the dog. I'm like, there's nothing, like, I didn't think there was anything wrong with this dog. A good friend of mine with short hairs, Wade Dellinger in Virginia, he took a shine because, the Bronco has the long ears and they're cute, and he took a shining to this dog. So I always say it was funny. This Bronco went from a very, very nice neighborhood to a very rural Virginia German short hair home. And he went on to test that dog, and it was the first female Bronco that got a prize one utility award. So
jeez,
there was nothing wrong with the dog. It was the customer.
Well, that doesn't surprise me. We get some funny calls, I can tell you.
Yeah. But then it's those success stories when you get those letters or Christmas cards back, and you're like, damn, we put it in a good home,
Yeah. We've definitely got those as well. But yeah, we've had a few of them that just weren't a good match. And, they've, at least one of them's come back. And so, yeah, it seems to work out regardless, probably for the better for everyone when that happens.
And as a breeder, you guys would prefer that dog to come back home if there's any issue, right?
Yeah, actually, when we sell the dogs, we sell them under contract, and we don't allow the owner to transfer the dog without us knowing who it's getting transferred to.
Right.
And if they want to give up the dog for whatever reason, then they are to contact us, and then normally we would just take that dog back in and find a new home for it. We had one that was all the way up in Alaska, and it came back to us. It got shipped back to us, and
Wow.
we had it rehomed in a few days. So,
wow. Because you have a nice customer database, I'm sure, right? People.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we just put something out on our social media channel, and like I said, within a few days, that dog was gone.
Yeah. You have a couple bullet points you sent to me, and you said we could talk about the relationship between Llewellyn and its owner and how it impacts performance in the field. And you said, in my opinion, of course, everything's in our opinion.
Yeah.
Expound on that a little bit. Is it what I was talking about, that cooperation that just seems to transcend through it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think what I was trying to get at there was somewhat what I talked about earlier. If you spend enough time with these dogs, they develop a level of trust with you, and they have a desire to please. And so, what I've found is, as we develop relationships with these dogs, being in our house and then going on vacations with us and just spending as much time with them as we do, when a person does get in the field, since you've got that bond built, they tend, in my experience, to just react better to correction.
Yeah.
Stick around. Something as simple as just sticking around.
Well, sticking around is probably the biggest thing that frustrates the people who have dogs that don't stick around, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Half the battle is the dog's not listening, the dog's not coming, right?
Yep.
So,
And so I think, that's kind of what I mean. It's like we've developed a bond with these dogs, and because of that bond, I just think that they serve us better.
yeah.
If that makes any sense. Yeah.
Oh, it does. It does. And that's kind of the thing when you're selling that dog to somebody, that's kind of like you almost take that worry out of the equation. Like, he may not hunt it right, he may not train it right, but he's not going to have, let's just, for lack of a better term, a runaway dog. He's
Right.
still going to have a connected dog, or he or she's going to have a connected dog. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So often I see, people take even our dogs, take them, leave here with them, and they put an e-collar on them, and they feel like the world's problems are all fixed now. And
yeah,
it's beyond the e-collar. I mean, we run I don't have anything against e-collars. We run e-collars on all of our dogs, but
right.
It's just amazing that people think sometimes that that's the fix-all, and that's to me, that's not the place to start. The place to start with the bond, then put the e-collar on.
Right. Yeah. The proper use of an e-collar, and I've stated it many times, is just a third language for the dog and you to communicate. It's not. Yes, it could be used for correction, but you could teach a whistle, you could teach a hand signal, you can teach a verbal signal, and you could teach an e-collar signal, and it's just like having a multilingual dog.
Yeah.
And at a distance, it's a language that you don't have to, that it can hear. If you
Right.
Yeah. No.
I tell you what I like about the e-collars. We run Garmin collars, and they have a beep function on them, and there is nothing. If people do this, by all means, continue to do it. But for me, there's nothing that's more disturbing on a hunt than just somebody yelling at their dog all day long. And so,
Yeah.
And so with our dogs, we've gotten to the point now where we just push that beep button. I don't know that I can't even remember the last we actually corrected the dogs, but
Right.
just pushing the beep button, they know, like, oh, it's time for me to come back and check in. And so there's not really a lot of yelling at all that goes on. It's just beep, and they come back and check in.
Yeah.
And so that's been a lifesaver. And I think too, particularly with the Garmins that I like, is it takes an element of stress out of hunting that not too long ago it was just stressful not knowing where your dog was
Right.
sometimes.
I just
So,
noticed your wrist go up in the air. I saw your. Looks like you have
oh
an.
yeah,
You got the Instinct watch on
oh this is a Phoenix actually,
for the Phoenix.
Phoenix 5, but yeah, it connects to the collars and everything.
Yeah. Let me one up you. Watch this.
Oh man, what is that?
That's the new Instinct.
Flashlight.
That's the new Instinct with a flashlight on the side of it.
Man, that's
And
sweet.
I'm telling you what, you're going to trade that Phoenix in pretty quick because you don't have to have a headlamp on. It's right there on your wrist. You know, you just boom,
Oh,
boom.
that's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love their pride. They're obviously one of the sponsors of the show, and I did not prep you to bring it up, but
No.
whether it's a Garmin or whatever brand, knowing where your dog at, yeah, that peace of mind, you can't replace that, you know.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So, just let's get into a little hunting. I think I've now fallen in love with Llewellins, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of people out there with English setters. If they did a 23andMe, they'd find out that, oh my God, this one traces back to, you know,
Yeah. Yep.
you're in Kansas. Now I've hunted Kansas a couple, 1, 2, 3, 4 times. Little duck, little quail. Never done particularly well. Is Kansas one of them spots where you almost really have to live there to do well, or can you just get in there and because when I go to another state, it takes me trips to get very acclimated. Then there's other states where I can go and I can just wander, like like northern North Dakota. You just wander around and find birds, right?
Right. Yeah.
What's it like in Kansas?
Well, it certainly helps to be here. And it's getting to be more that way only because we had a drought last year. It's continued into this year. It's going to be we're going to have a tough season ahead of us from what
Yeah.
I can tell. But yeah, particularly like quail hunting. I mean, if you've done any kind of quail hunting, and a lot of people have, once you find a covey, it's not very difficult to go back to that same spot a month later and find that covey again
Right.
in the same general area. But all the hunting that we do is either on public lands or on the walk-in hunting areas that are here in our state. And there's about 1 million acres of walk-in. I don't hunt any private land, and so I'm sharing with everybody else. But you're correct. Like, I know those spots. I know how they've performed years past, and it certainly helps. That said, I've met a guy in Montana a few years ago and talked quail hunting with him. And on the spur of a moment, he left from North Carolina and drove to Kansas straight through and came here and hunted and had a great time.
Yeah.
And so he was just able to get on birds and it's just like hunting anywhere else. Once you get a covey in the area or you find a covey, look around. And what are you standing in? What do you see? And then
Right.
just start finding more of that,
Right. Right.
And so, but yeah, I mean, it definitely helps if you're from this area. But again, I hunt all over the country, and I'm kind of like you. I can usually find them in about anywhere if you just look hard enough and long enough. You got to put some effort into it and some miles.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So with all those
Yeah.
grandparent histories, you don't have one family farm left to go.
There are places I could go and hunt on private land, particularly some of those places that my grandfather used to hunt. I mean, back in that time, I grew up on a peach farm, and he would take me
Back that up, Jeff. A peach farm.
yeah, peach
Kansas?
orchard. Yeah, South Central Kansas.
I did not know they grew. I thought they grew them in Georgia.
No, they do grow them
this
down there.
podcast. You're drunk.
No, So I grew up on a peach farm, and usually in the summertime, during peach season, my grandpa would come over and buy a crap load of peaches, fill the bed of his pickup up with half bushel the boxes of peaches, and we would drive around and deliver peaches to people we hunted on.
No kidding.
And that was your ticket. but as those farms have turned over, yeah, I could probably call and get on a lot of those properties still yet today. But quite honestly, my life is complicated enough with my job that, and all the logistics of what I do, that by the time it comes time to go hunting, I don't really want to deal with the logistical nightmare of calling and getting permission. And
Right.
yeah, you can come hunt, but not this week and not
Mhm.
before 9 o'clock. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I've just started exclusively hunting public ground and walk-in areas, and done just as good as I could do anywhere else, in my opinion.
And obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, it's a habit of mine. When you were a kid, you probably had, obviously, when you were with your grandpa, you were probably on family farms and neighbors' farms back in the day. Is it, like I would suspect, is it a lot different, just the farming practices, or you know, are those
Oh
old
yeah.
farms that your grandpa went to? It doesn't mean you're going to find birds on them, even if you could make the connection.
No, yeah, and that's a good point you make, Ron, because a lot of those areas where we used to hunt were in the eastern third of the state, and a lot of those areas, the quail hunting down there is just not as good as it used to be. I mean, you used to go down to the southeast corner of Kansas and just, man, there were quail everywhere. Every fence row you got into, there was quail.
Yeah.
And you'd be hard pressed to go to that part of our state right now and find a quail.
Wow.
It's almost like, I've explained this to people before, and of course it's just my assessment, but the terrain and the woody vegetative cover that existed at that time in the mid 80s in that part of the state is now the same woody vegetative cover that exists where I'm at right now, which is more north central Kansas.
Which
And
is
so the quail have moved with those areas.
right. They're going to always follow the habitat, so they followed the habitat.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's no reason for me to drive to southeast Kansas when I can almost drive within, a mile of my house. And well, actually, where we run our dogs, we run into coveys and quail every once in a while. So they're just right here.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not
Yeah.
bad. That's not bad, Jeff. I hope you don't mind if one of these days I pop in on you. Not
No.
to do anything besides, more importantly, I'd like to hunt behind your dogs. I've judged dogs for 25 years, and I get no bigger pleasure than, like, not being critical, but like, wow, I'd like to put that dog in my truck, because you've been with people, I'm sure you're like, wow, your dog's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And you don't do any hunt testing or hunt trialing or anything like that with your dogs. You hunt them, health check, breed them, place them in homes. Is it something that you just don't have the time for, or is it something that like you said, Hickory Hollow Llewellins has been around a long time, and you have it now. Is your customer base just such that they're always just looking for the foot hunting dog? They're not looking for the titles.
Yeah. I mean, we've got plenty of folks looking for dogs. We've got a long waiting list. And so,
Yeah.
but me personally, I don't do hunt testing for a number of reasons. The number one reason I probably don't do it is because of time.
Mhm.
Having a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old
Yeah, that's
and
not
kids the last 15 years, I'd have been hard pressed to find time to do it,
right.
or make time to do it. And plus, I mean, I own my own business too, so that takes up a lot of time. But honestly, I'm not a super competitive person. I just like to go out, hunt, and have a good time when I want to do it.
Right.
And I don't want to be in a position, or I don't think I would enjoy being in a position where I know, like, okay, Saturday I've got to go do a hunt test because it's close and that's the day, and it's raining or it's hot, and I
Yeah.
don't want to really do it, but I'm just going because that's when it was scheduled.
You're kind of like a modern day breeder with health testing and checks, and you're doing your due diligence, but you're going back to your grandpa's day where you just bought a good dog from somebody who bred good dogs, basically.
Yeah, basically. And I'm not a competitive person at all. my kids are. I think they must have got that from my wife Jennifer, but I literally could care less about ribbons and those kinds of things. I do understand, like, some of our customers probably wish we would do testing, but it doesn't seem to be creating an issue where we don't have enough customers. That's for sure.
Right. Well, ribbons are nice. And when you say I've always said that I've always said I'm a non-competitive person. I have competed in martial arts tournaments, but like when I play a board game, I laugh just as hard if I lose if I win. When I play cards, I laugh just as hard if I lose when I win. And when I hunt, I laugh just as hard as I lose as I win. So
Yeah.
I think we get along. I think we get along pretty good. I mean, I'm not your
Yeah.
age. I'm still alive, but I think we do good out in the field together. It would be a good walk.
Yeah. I can tell you, my grandpa, man, he was something else. I can say this now because we're beyond the statute of limitations and he's dead, but I spent many trips sitting in the back seat or in a regular cab pickup in the middle, cleaning birds into a grocery bag, quail, and taking a break from that to maybe mix a Weller's and water while driving down the road.
Oh, we're gonna get along just fine.
Yeah.
Just fine.
So I learned he was awesome. My grandpa was definitely a character, and I miss him greatly. And he was something else for sure.
But it sounds
Good
like
guy.
the legacy lived on, and you found another breeder, and you took on Hickory Hollow Llewellyn. So it's kind of like what we'd call an old soul in the dog.
Well, I appreciate that. I think it's the best compliment a guy could give me.
Yeah. Hey, real quick before we end, how did you meet Matt?
Yeah. So, well, I started kind of paying attention to Matt when he started focusing on the group that he's formed called Montana Hunters for Access.
Yeah.
And so, not to get too deep into it, but Montana Hunters for Access is really focused on the block management program in Montana, which is very similar to our walk-in hunting access program that we have in Kansas.
Right. Weehaw. Right.
Weehaw. Yep. Yeah. Weehaw. And so what he's trying to do there with that, not just him, but he's got a board. There's a few gentlemen that are involved, and they've had good success so far, is kind of pay it forward a little bit. And paying it forward is rewarding those landowners that enroll in the block management program by giving them gifts and by doing work on their farms and ranches with volunteers.
Nice.
And so once I heard that, and knowing that Kansas only, I think, 1.8% public land, the rest of it's, if you want to hunt, you got to hunt weehaw for the most part, especially birds.
Which weehaw would be like their block management. It's land. It's private owned property that is enrolled, but it doesn't mean it's guaranteed, right?
It's not guaranteed forever. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just the state leases the ground, and then if you have a hunting license, you can hunt it. And so, anyway, when I saw what he was doing there, I was like, damn, that's a good idea. And so I immediately reached out to Matt about how it works up there, what he's doing. Mm-hmm. He got super excited, and then asked if we would be willing to form a chapter in Kansas. And so we formed a group called Kansas Hunters for Access.
Nice.
And if here pretty quick, it's probably going to be just one big giant group called Hunters for Access with different chapters in different states.
Right.
So Montana will be first, Kansas the second, and we're in our very infancy stage here. We just filed for our 501c3 nonprofit status. And so as soon as we hear back from that, then we'll probably get more public with what we're doing. But we have a board formed here in Kansas. We got some gentlemen that are real excited about doing something. And like I said, Matt had a fantastic idea. Just fantastic.
And for such a grassroots thing to say, look, we know we have it, but we know it's not guaranteed. And making those, whatever you can do for those farmers that are enrolling. I'm sure X% of those farmers would do it anyway, but to keep the ones in that may not, or then you guys put on a good face forward and help them out with a project or give them gifts or whatever for keeping in there. I mean, that's especially where Matt's doing it. There's still a gazillion acres of public land, but
Yep.
it's that private lands that are really in Weehaw and in block management. It is like public land. And to keep it public by working with the landowners, I think that's great. I thought that was really neat when he told me, and that's how I found you, was through you and him talking.
Yeah. At the end of the day, I don't know whether Hunters for Access is going to make a difference, but if all hell breaks loose and we lose block management and we lose Weehaw, I want to at least be able to say I did something. We did something.
Exactly. It's better than,
Yeah.
My first trips. I always say my first trips to the Dakotas, I'd look at brome grass and I thought pheasants were in it, because it was just, big field of grass.
Right.
I didn't pay attention to pollinators. I didn't pay attention to programs. I would almost say I was just opportunistically going there to have a good time. So if you can do something that makes just a tiny dent, I think that's fantastic. I applaud you for doing it. And I hope more people do it. And like you said, in Kansas, if you didn't have the Weehaw, it would only be knocking on doors, and that's not real good these days,
Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Back in your grandpa's day, you could knock on any door, but that's not the way it goes anymore.
Yep, that's for sure. It doesn't go that way anymore. Yep.
Well, listen, Jeff, I have tied up a good portion of your evening. I really appreciate you coming on, talking about your Llewellins. I hope you don't get inundated by people, but I'm sure you're going to get a few phone calls, and I'll make it on my trip for January. Come out and see you.
Yeah, come out and see us, and
Maybe we can get Matt to come down. I bird hunted with him up in Montana before. He's not a bad shot. He just bring he'll bring that damn little corgi with him, and we'll have to deal with that.
No, you're more than welcome to come down here. It'd be a great time. So I encourage it. And and anybody interested, just give me a call. I can't promise we can get you a puppy soon. We can sure get you on a list.
All right. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All
Jeff.
right. Thanks, Ron. Yep. We'll see you.
All right. Bye-bye.